The subject of this video is something that modern science, especially medicine, doesn't like to teach people, it doesn't like to get into it. It's kind of a taboo subject. And it revolves around two interrelated topics. The first is immunology, or the study of the immune system, but specifically how that affects your physiology and psychology. Although we've divided those into separate fields of study, they are in fact one and the same. Your immune system is your interaction with microorganisms in your environment, and this impacts the development of your psychology and physiology. In simpler terms, we can say it's how microorganisms affect your individuation, the process of you becoming who you are. The second interrelated topic is animism, and this is something that is largely misunderstood. It's misunderstood because it's viewed through the lens of Christian anthropology. The definition you're probably familiar with is that all things have a soul. Inanimate objects, elements of nature, plants and animals, all have this kind of supernatural anthropomorphization to it. A better definition of animism is that all of these things, plants and animals and objects and microorganisms, have subjective agency. They're intelligent and conscious. And all of these persons, they view and interact with the world in their own way. Now what we have to do is deconstruct modern scientific philosophy, which was built on the scaffolds of Christian anthropology. To summarize briefly, because there's a lot to talk about, Christianity has this idea of God, who is the kind of agency of all things. It's very predeterministic. Everything happens through God, because of God, or with God's awareness. Science separated from this only in name, which is that they've applied that same agency to things like genetics and chemicals and laws of physics, and so that the agency became a mechanistic agency. It's the same predetermined belief that is the foundation of all Western society. This belief is at the core of tragedies such as imperialism and colonialization of many parts of the world and other problematic teachings of science. The reason why is because what happens in predeterminism? Well, you naturally create hierarchies. This hierarchy removes the agency of animism from other life forms such as cattle or crops. These belief systems, of course, place humans on the top of that hierarchy, meaning any animal or plant or anything in nature is reduced to a non-intelligent, instinctual automaton, and that it exists for our use. They don't have any subjective agency. All it takes is a slight leap of the imagination, and you can justify things like slavery, colonialism, and genocide. So that the first step was to dehumanize people. They're not the same category as you, so you can call them uncivilized, primitive, and savages. And if you consider how these belief systems treat anything else in nature below them, we know what they're capable of doing to other humans. The reason why this is all relevant to the beginning is because microbiology and modern medicine came from Amerindian shamanism. Here's a quick graph that shows this. The theory of contagion came during an epidemic of syphilis in Europe. And it was those theories that would ultimately lead to the idea of germs and eventually to the discovery of microorganisms themselves. Of course, they didn't actually discover microorganisms, but it's taught that before Pasteur, there was no possible conception of microorganisms. The disease also had a deep impact on medical and scientific knowledge in Europe. It influenced Fracastor's formulation of the theory of contagion, Sydenham's ontological theory of disease, and Ehrlich's success experimenting with organic arsenic predecessors of antibiotics. And those were foundational to the scientific studies that would follow over the next couple hundred years. But again, this information was filtered through the Christian missionaries who were trying to indoctrinate and discredit the Amerindian people as a whole, and especially the shamans. Missionaries and explorers recognized Amerindian shamans as accomplished physicians and powerful authority. For those reasons, over the following 500 years, missionaries sought to disenfranchise shamans from their positions of authority, co-opt their roles in society, as well as the shrines and the sacred places of their zemes. They portrayed it as a holy war and basically reduced them to the idea of like devil worshippers, and obscured the references of their practices and understandings. Anthropology has its roots in missionary accounts and inherited their conceptual frameworks. But this general concept applies to the many different shamanic and traditional folk practices from around the world that were destroyed during colonization or just outright discredited by the invention of modern science. In the past years, the understanding of microbes has changed further. Contemporary microbes have little in common with the understandings of Pasteur and Koch. These understandings have increasingly converged on the descriptions of various shamanic beings. Like them, microbial beings constitute closely knit ecological communities, exchanging signals and complex information, a variety of weapons, means of perceiving and acting upon their world. They can act in concert, cooperating and competing. They also lie for their own benefit. They are found in rocks and underground, at sea, and in the atmosphere, and are key players in the workings of the environment. They constitute an important proportion of the cells of the body of every plant, animal, and fungi. They are crucial for our functioning, endowing us with many of our specific affections and capacities, promoting our growth and reproduction, affecting moods and behaviors, our perception, cognition, and how we are perceived. Furthermore, some of these beings are zoonotic diseases. In other words, they protect their hosts, predating upon their predators, and on strangers to their environments, an issue of increasing concern given the recent rise of emerging infectious diseases. Most microbiologists are unlikely to acknowledge microbes as persons endowed with a subjectivity. Moreover, many microbiologists undermine their own claims about the sociality and communication of microbes, taking them as heuristic interpretations. This reluctance to acknowledge the preconditions and consequences of sociality and communication is partially derived from anthropocentric prejudices associated with human exceptionalism, which Western sciences inherited from Christianity. Even while unsubstantiated, these prejudices have remained deeply ingrained in the epistemology of Western sciences and entrenched in disciplinary boundaries. It is in their acknowledgement of subjectivity and in the development of intersubjective relations that shamanic perspectives on microbial shamanic beings would allow us to earnestly explore their forms of sociality and communication, leading to more enlightening views, relevant not only for the understanding of microbes, but for our understanding of our relations with the world. Perhaps then, valuing the patient's experience, we could start to ask, what is it that the treponema of a given patient wants, and what can I give it in exchange? How do our commensal and different diseases and parasites, how do they interact with us and share in this sort of subjective agency? When you go to a doctor, they tell you what you're experiencing and what you're feeling. They remove the subjective agency from you. The shaman considered themselves peers of these zemes. They were able to communicate effectively and interpret their will and advice. They acted as medical practitioners and would engage in intimate interaction with the patient. They would cohabit with the patient, sharing the same diet regime, mimicking their expressions, exposing themselves through close contact. In this way, they were able to access similar subjective perspectives through which they were able to interpret the relation between the pathogenic being and the patient. In these circumstances, their zemes would instruct them into suitable remedies and would assist in the cure of diseases, combating and predating upon enemy zemes. There's no such thing as good or bad microorganisms, but there are some that can cause diseases that are opportunistic, that will have their own intentions and goals and ways of affecting you. But everything has a reason, and everything has its own subjective agency. Humans aren't just becoming sick through mechanistic mutations and randomness. You don't get cavities just because, you don't get acne just because, cancer and diabetes and arthritis and chronic pain and psychological, neurological disorders. None of those things just happen because of randomness, because of genetics. They happen because there is this interaction of all of these beings and entities, all of these persons. And these things are interacting and affecting physiology and psychology, and just as your psychology and physiology can in turn affect them. The immune system is just a fancy term for the subconscious interaction with these microbial beings. It all has meaning, it's all alive and interacting, it's animistic. And in the same way that these things can negatively impact you, it also means that you can positively change and heal. No disease or illness or birth defect is inevitable through this mechanistic approach of genetics. We can reconstruct science and medicine with this understanding of our own subjective agency and that of the hundreds of trillions of microbial beings in and around us, as well as the life, intelligence, and consciousness of all of the animals and plants in nature. Thanks for watching.